The story theme we experienced last night is probably well over 10,000 years old because it's universal all over the world. The most common example is probably Julius Caesar, but I found it in the folk tales of the indigenous people of Timor in Southeast Asia and many other places. Now, the Timor story is very interesting. There's a farmer, and he works hard, but one day these women come up to him from the village and they say, "You're so stupid because every year you work so hard working on your field, and every season the pirates come and they steal all your stuff." And they kept chiding him about this over and over again, telling him how stupid he was for working at all. And this was manipulation, basically to try to get him to do something about the pirates. Well, he finally decides he's going to do something about the pirates. And he says, "Okay, I'm going to go fight all these pirates and make sure they never come back again. But after I do, all you women better serve me. If you agree that afterwards, if I come back, after I risk my life, I come back, then you guys have got to cook my food, clean my clothes, and I want 7 wives." Now, this isn't so strange in Timor because people have multiple wives there, but he's putting forth a price for his risking his life to go do what they're chiding him about. So he goes and he actually defeats the pirates. He raises up an army of people. He defeats the pirates. He kills the pirate king single-handedly in there. And then from then on, all the pirates are scared to death to ever attack them again. And he lives this quiet life. And the women do what they agreed to do. They serve his food and they provide him with the 7 most beautiful women of the village for his wife. And he becomes lazy. He's not the greatest ruler in the world. He's not a terrible tyrant, but he's not all that great of a leader either. And one day, 7 men from the best houses of the village band together and they assassinate him. One of them is his best friend, just like A2 Brute from Caesar. And after they kill him, they erect a monument for him, and the whole village comes out and cries. And the theme of this story is the person to liberate the village is not always the best to rule. In fact, it's a very different sort of person that you need to fight a war than it is for the kind of person you need to rule. And this is a theme that we've seen in Game of Thrones since the very beginning. It's said by several different characters about Robert Baratheon. So the question is, now that we've seen the grand finale, did D&D tell this fable well? There's a lot of disappointment being expressed on the internet about the series and the grand finale. And in some of my earlier videos this week, I said that maybe if this isn't resolved or that isn't resolved, maybe it's a failure. But I'm actually not too disappointed with the grand finale because it's just a series. It always has been a supplement to the masterwork that is the book series Game of Thrones. And I really didn't have high expectations at the beginning that it would match the books. But, you know, when you read about this incredible, expansive world and all these incredible plot lines and character arcs that are going on when you read the books, and you get to see a little bit of that in high quality film, that's great. That's an awesome bonus, and that's what I expected Game of Thrones to be from the beginning. Season 1 followed the books pretty well, and I was just overjoyed with that because the first couple seasons really followed the series well and included most of the pertinent parts and stuck to the dialogue of George R. R. Martin pretty well. It was beyond my expectations for the series because so many other books that I've loved that have been made into film did not have that. I mean, you think about, Lord of the Rings was a great film. Love seeing it in real time, but they took Tom Bombadil from me, I mean, that was one of my most awesome childhood memories is Tom Bombadil, and I think it's very important to the rest of the story. And Lord of the Rings did not follow Tolkien quite as well, I think, as the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones followed George R. R. Martin's masterpiece. And I read today a very interesting article by a philosophy professor somewhere who's commenting on Game of Thrones, and he explains something pretty well. He explains the difference between a pantser and a plotter in literary fiction or genre fiction. George R. R. Martin, I've heard his interviews about this, he calls it, instead of pantser and plotter, he calls it architect and gardener, and George R. R. Martin is really a gardener, and so he makes this huge bush of a book, and then he starts pruning it, and eventually he gets to something that he likes, and he doesn't know what's going to happen at the end of the series when he starts it. And he says to his editors, as you know, I'm not interested in a book if I know the ending, but I have a general idea where I want it to go. The original synopsis that he sent into his editor is very different than what we see in the books and what we see in the series, and I think that the books will play out a lot different than they did in the series over the past couple episodes. Now, George has always said we hopefully want this series and this book to end up somewhere around the same place, but they're going to be a lot different because they're writing without any source material for the past, I think, 3 or 4 seasons. The professor's name is Daniel Silvermint, by the way, and he's been posting threads about this on Twitter today. But it seems that once David and David, the producers, no longer had George's source material to go on as they were heading towards the general climax that George R. R. Martin had told them about at the famous dinner meeting so long ago, they tried to take over for a time the pruning and the gardening that George was doing. They tried to go a little bit farther with all these different plot lines, and they kind of messed up on that. They messed up on Dorne, for instance, and caused some disappointments. But in this last season, they've let plot take over. What they've decided is the plot, and they are working as plotters rather than gardeners in order to get us to the end at a certain amount of time. They decided several years back that they were going to do the rest of it in this many seasons, wrote a plot for it, and it wasn't enough time. Their pacing suffered, and that's true. But also, it makes it feel like a synopsis. The last season, it almost seems like a synopsis of a preordained plot rather than strong character development. Now, I understand why all the decisions were made. If you knew a little bit more of the story, then all of the plot lines make sense. Daenerys' choice to do what she did was well explained by Tyrion and Jon as they led up to the climax in this last episode. But it could have been developed a little bit more if they'd had more time. What I want to address here is the complaints about the plot itself. There may be some very predictable things. There were definitely some very predictable things, which is not typical of Martin, because we all have come to expect these great twists in his writing. And maybe David and David didn't follow through with that expectation. But they really did provide a touching and well-resolved ending in this last episode, despite all that. And like I said, it's good enough for a TV series. Some are saying, Jon should have been king. I see major disappointment on the internet about Jon having to go up north. And I think that these detractors are missing something. That's the best thing that could have happened to Jon. That's where he wanted to go. He didn't want to be king. I mean, haven't you guys been watching this whole 8 seasons of people trying to kill each other to get to that damn throne? All the politics. Jon Snow has been in King's Landing like 10 minutes. The whole thing. That man has been in King's Landing for about 10 minutes for all 8 episodes. And all 10 minutes, he hated it. Some city people might not quite understand this, but Jon's a country boy like me. And we don't want to be in the city. And we also don't want to rule over anybody. Just leave me alone and let me do what I want. And don't ask me to boss anybody around. I can totally identify with this guy going up north and being with the true people, the free folk, who don't put on airs and living like you want to out in the free without a bunch of people trying to rule over me. Sentence him to be king would be the worst punishment you could possibly give Jon Snow. But because R plus L equals J, somebody wants to sentence him to that. I mean, that's the whole point. Bloodlines shouldn't be a determination of who gets to rule. Just because you're from one bloodline or another, even if it's Targaryen, doesn't mean you should get to rule over people or lord over people. You might be crazy. And when they closed that gate behind Jon and the wildlings as they were leaving Castle Black, sounded like they were closing it for good. And the way he smiled, you know, Jon's a different dude now. He's not so dogmatic as he used to be. He understands the gray area. And the point, one of the themes that George Martin was trying to make, the sliding scale between good and evil. And he is no longer above leaving the Night's Watch to live in the wild, post facto king beyond the wall. I can see Jon living out his final days in happiness because he's discovered new things in the now safer Great White North. Moving on to Cersei and Jaime, you know, we didn't get a grand finale twist at the end of their arc. Some say we didn't get justice for Cersei, and we didn't get the Valonqar prophecy finalized or resolved, but of course it wasn't actually in the series. And this final episode kind of redeemed all that in a way because of the awesome performance of Peter Dinklage when he's uncovering Jaime, and the theme that Tyrion also points out when he's talking to Jon in the cell about duty conquering love, or love being more powerful than duty. And though they could have spent more time on the Jaime Brienne romance to make that leaving and being overpowered by love at the end more powerful, it did fit in well with the ultimate end of Jon overcoming love to do what he had to do. It makes it a little bit more poignant, I guess you might say. And so I think that since the Tyrion scene of discovering them together in that pose was adequately dramatic, it somewhat makes up for the lack of pacing in that subplot and last week's somewhat unresolved conclusion of Jaime and Cersei's arc. I said just a few days ago that they're making a big mistake if they don't tell us more about the Night King and his heritage, because in the books it's pretty obvious that he's a Stark. He has history with the Night's Watch. There's more to the story than just the wildlings turning someone with dragonglass to fight the invading humans. There's more to the foreshadowing when Nan tells Bran that the Night King's name was Bran Stark. There's more to the themes of reincarnation that are throughout the books. And David didn't come through on explaining more. They just left it at, oh, he was after me because I'm the memory of the world and he wanted a night to last forever. As I said in my last videos, that's too Sauron for George Martin, and he's going to give us something more than that in the books. But I do understand why the series chose to do what they did. It's because of the upcoming series, The Long Night, the spin-off series. They're saving all that, those twists that are going to be in Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, the books. They're saving those twists that George Martin's going to give us soon for their spin-off series, The Long Night. That's going to reveal everything about the Night King, and so I bet you it was an executive decision to leave us in the dark to sell us another series. Well, I'm definitely going to watch the series, and I will be commentating on it here, so I hope you'll subscribe and check out what I have to say when we start getting more news about the long night. But one mystery that I really thought that they would wrap up in the series was the mystery of Cat's Paw. Arya's dagger, the one someone gave to an assassin to kill Bran. This may have a lot to do with the Night King's origin. And what bothers me about this one plot hole is that this was the inciting incident. Bran was the first POV character of the series, so it's kind of fitting that it ends with him becoming king, but his being pushed out of the window, and especially this assassin that's sent to kill him when that doesn't do the job, is the inciting incident of the whole series. It's what started the war. And those are supposed to be resolved. The series included that part, so they should have resolved it. And it's perplexing that they didn't. I wonder if this has something to do with their hiding things from us for the long night as well. I think they could have done a little bit more. Even so, I almost wonder, does David and David not know what an inciting incident is, or did they just say, screw it, I'm not even going to subvert it, I'm just going to forget about it? Did they forget about it because they got so wrapped up in being gardeners and then went back to being plotters? I'm not sure. Now, back to Dany's death. Now, it was predictable. I admit that. I wanted something less predictable, so I dared to dream. And something interesting that I'd like to convey to all you guys out there, and writers out there especially, there has been 10 years at least or more of speculation about the endings of this series, and there have been some really great plots that people have come up with, some great twist endings that people have come up with in all the speculation. I wonder how many great science fiction and fantasy stories could be written off of those ready-made twists and ready-made plots, because I'd like to read some of them myself. I'd like to write some of them myself. For any of you guys who think that David and David's ending, their version, was not predictable, I'd like to quote someone from Reddit. The guy's name is Your Daily Devil, or his handle is Your Daily Devil. 1 week ago, this guy posted on Reddit, "You can guess this one. The framework for Jon killing Dany is too obvious by now. It's what the writers want. They could throw a curveball and have Tyrion do it, which, honest to God, would be better writing from an arc standpoint and less rushed, but still bad writing. But signs point strongly to Jon killing Dany. Something subtle and romantic, i.e. a dagger in the heart or stomach. The reason for this is so they can get that cheap, overused cliche where the weapon goes in off screen, followed by a reveal shot. Regardless of who kills her, they're going to try to pump up the sappiness on it hard. There will be an angry dragon bellowing mournfully. This will be followed by a moment it will either look at the killer with anger or just fly off. In my mind, the most sappy and predictable is Jon kills Dany. Dany has a moment of self-realization that she went mad. Dany lies peacefully. Drogon comes in all confused and angry. Dragon flies off to a better place, i.e. screenwriting cliche, don't kill the cat. If the dragon flies off carrying Dany across the ocean, I'm going to punch something." And that was from Your Daily Devil on Reddit. This is true, but as I said before, they are kind of in synopsis mode, and they are Hollywood, and you know, the fans of Game of Thrones do love that romantic, sappy stuff. If you look at it as only a supplement to the books instead of the books themselves, then it's alright. I think they did a good job with it. Despite the predictability and the cliche, I think they did a good job with it, and I think it was especially good because of the performance by Emilia Clarke. Here's what she says. "I wanted to play a game with what the scene was about. It's not that I wanted to show her as mad, because I really don't like that word. I don't enjoy fans calling me the Mad Queen. But she is so far gone in grief, in trauma, and in pain. And yet our brains are fascinating in the way that they find a fast route to feel okay, whether you're relying on a substance or you're mildly deluded. If you see abuse in someone young, they often are able to mentally leave the room. I wanted Daenerys to be there. I wanted to show her as we saw her in the beginning, young, naive, childlike, open, and full of love and hope. I wanted so much for that to be the last memory of her. I think that she accomplished that. I think she did a really good performance, and in a way she subtly subverted that trope in the way that she did it. It was kind of convincing for a second, you know, oh my gosh, she really does, just like Tyrion said, believe in herself and really is full of love. And for just a split second, you doubt the predictability. You're thinking, because maybe Jon's convinced just like we are. And they used the passionate kiss to try to drive that home. And just for a split second, maybe you're thinking, oh wow, maybe Jon will go evil too. But of course, only for a split second. So as far as a television show, I like the resolution. It was fitting for a television show rendition of a masterpiece. And I don't think we have an example of a television show or a movie series that has matched the accomplishment of the book that it's trying to emulate. We're always going to have these little romantic things, and I think part of it is given in to the public. It's partly our fault, because once something gets so huge and leaves its niche audience, it's kind of almost the collective property of the whole public, much broader audience. There's people watching games. I'd say half of the people who watch Game of Thrones don't usually like fantasy, don't watch fantasy, and their expectations are to have Jon become king. So maybe David and David did compromise a little bit for the primetime audience. Primetime audience version is going to be a lot different than the masterpiece itself. I'm not saying Jon's not going to kill Dany in the books. He probably will. But I bet you we won't see it coming. And I bet you it won't happen in the same place. And I bet you we will immediately reconcile in our minds his character arc up to that point. I bet you we'll know the true origins of the Night King at the end of A Dream of Spring, and we'll know what his relationship is to the Starks. We'll know some more secrets of the crypts in Winterfell at the end of A Dream of Spring, and we'll know who sent the assassin to kill Bran. We'll have a much more fascinating and resolved plot line for Dorne, because there's a lot of seeds sown in the books that were never mentioned. And I would imagine that Arya is going to use her shape-changing powers or face-changing powers to a lot more effect than just killing Walder Frey in relation to the plot of Westeros. Well, that's all for now. I hope you guys subscribe. I got one coming up talking about the symbolism of esoteric philosophy in many of the names in Game of Thrones, what the meaning behind Jon's comments on the afterlife was, what being no one really means, and also be doing commentary and analysis of The Long Night when it comes out, as well as the other series. So I hope you subscribe, and I hope you check out my other videos.